Hi everyone, Ranger Aaron here, and thanks for joining us. Today I want to talk to you about rats. Now I'm sure you're wondering, why do I even want to talk about rats? The name alone can conjure up images of diseased and disgusting creatures that can really make our home life rather uncomfortable if they get in uninvited. But out here in nature, all rats serve an important role in the ecosystem. For one, they are a very important source of food for many animals, predators such as bobcats, coyotes, birds of prey, and even mountain lions. And because they're such an important source of food for other animals, it's a good reminder on why we should try to avoid using rodenticides to deal with these rodents. Because we have no idea what animal is going to come along and eat that poison rat. And two, they are a very important spreader of many of our native seeds all out here in nature. And today, there's one particular rat that I'd like to focus on. The woodrat, popularly known as the pack rat. And I'd like to focus on this particular rat today because it has such a unique personality and home life that really makes it stand out as a unique creature here in the Santa Monica Mountains. Now, while there are many different species of woodrats, the one that makes the Santa Monica Mountains its home is known as the dusky-footed woodrat. And to help us understand more about these neat creatures, we're going to go out today and take a look at some woodrat homes that we have here in our park. Now, woodrats are nocturnal by nature, so we're probably not going to run into any as we're going out today. But before we do go out, I want to give you a good idea about what a woodrat home or den looks like. At first glance, they'll appear to be nothing more than a big pile of sticks, twigs, and branches, all neatly packed together, and of varying sizes. You'll sometimes find them built amongst trees, bushes, sometimes even hidden from sight. And they can even be built in caves, crevices, and even up in a tree, kind of like a tree house. So now that we have a good idea about what these homes look like, let's go see if we can find any out in our park. Let's go. All right, we're getting close to some of the dens that we have found here in our park early on. And one of them is actually right straight ahead of me. Can you see it? It does blend in quite well with the environment. And that's what makes finding these dens kind of difficult sometimes. But the den we have right in front of us, we're not going to get up close to that one. Because if you look closely, you'll tell that it's actually built amongst poison oak. And you know, since I made that mistake already once before, I'm not going to want to make it again. Luckily for us, this particular woodrat has a neighbor living just over there. Now you probably can't see it from here, but we're going to go in for a closer look. All right, here we are. This is one of the dens that we found really early on. And you know, because we found it so early, we decided to put a wildlife camera right outside this den just to see if anyone's still here. We're happy to say this massive den is still in use. We captured some footage of our local woodrat going about her nightly business. And by the way, in case you're wondering, yes, this home is as big as it looks. We measured it to be around 6 feet in height and 5 feet in width right at the base. That's a lot of room, particularly given that the average woodrat is only about 8 inches in size. And on top of that, woodrats tend to be solitary creatures. And what that means is they tend not to share their home with other woodrats. So she has all the space she could possibly need in this massive home. And plus, most woodrats also maintain multiple dens for the purpose of expanding their foraging range. So let's get a good look at this den and see what it looks like up close. You can see that it is built rather firmly, meaning it is an incredibly strong structure, which would make it kind of hard, if not impossible, for any predator to get inside this home and go after that woodrat. And you'll also notice there's any number of entrances or exits all around, on the top, below, in the middle, and this is so the woodrat can go in or out on an as-needed basis, be it in case of emergency or with an oncoming predator, or just to go about their business. And one really interesting thing about this den is if you look right here, you'll see a rather large room facing right out to the open. As a bit of an overhang for some added protection And if you can look inside, you may even see a corridor leading into the den. But the most interesting thing is what we found in this room. See this piece of scat right here? It's not woodrat scat. Instead, it's actually bobcat scat. And that tells us one of two things. It tells us either A, our local pack rat decided to collect this scat and bring it to its home, or more interestingly, it tells us that perhaps a bobcat has used this den for a period of time. Now, it might seem a little weird, but it's actually not. It's quite common for other animals to use woodrat dens as their own personal den. To many, woodrats are considered to be keystone animals for their homes. And what that means is that other animals rely on them to survive. Scientists have found that other animals, such as lizards, frogs, mice, raccoons, and yes, even bobcats, have used woodrat dens. The footage you're seeing right now is from a wildlife camera that our biologists placed outside a separate woodrat den and facing a room similar to the one we just looked at. They did this because they wanted to see what the bobcats were doing. And they found that the baby bobcats and the mother were using a den as a place of protection, their own personal den, if you will. And because woodrats maintain multiple homes, that means there are safe houses just like this one all throughout the Santa Monica Mountains that can serve to be a nice home for many of our smaller creatures. And in case you're wondering about the scenario with the bobcats in the woodrat den, chances are the resident woodrat stayed in a separate den while they were living there. But it was more than happy to return home, granted with a bit of caution after they left. So you're probably wondering, what's going on inside the woodrat den? I mean, from the outside we've seen a number of different entrances or exits, but that's just really scratching the surface. There is so much more going on in here that we cannot see from the outside. If we were to peel away the tough exterior of this home, we'd see any number of chambers, each with their own individual use, not just one big chamber. So we're not going to tear apart this house just to get a good look on the inside, because after all, someone lives here, and we do not want to destroy someone's home. Luckily for us, we have a much less invasive way of getting a good peek on the inside. That is using a tool called a boroscope, also known as an endoscope. This allows us to put this camera inside any number of the entrances to get a good look on the inside. So let's take a peek in here so we can see what's going on inside this home as we learn all about the different rooms you'll find in the woodrat den. The most important room in any woodrat home or den is going to be the nest. And this is a location where the woodrat will sleep or where the mother will give birth to her young. This particular chamber is going to be identifiable by having soft plant-like material, such as finely shredded bark or the soft feathery parts of plants called thistledown. And this room can even be waterproof. And based on the size of the den, there can be anywhere from one to multiple different nests. And the second most important room in any woodrat home or den is going to be the food storage chamber. It's kind of like a pantry. And scientists have identified 3 different types of food storage chambers. There'll be one reserved specifically for foods such as acorns, a second chamber specifically for toxic foods which need to air out before they're safe to eat. And the third one is going to be for fungus. And just like a nest, there could be anywhere from 1 to multiple food storage chambers in a single den. There's still a few more cool things though about woodrats in their homes. The first is that woodrats are almost constantly working on their home. Anytime there's any bit of damage, they're on to fix it just like that, as long as it's safe to do so. And the longer they own the home, the bigger it can get. The more rooms, the more corridors. And finally, they have this cool little thing they do with the California bay leaf. They don't eat it, which is good because that's a toxic plant. Rather, they use it to kill fleas and flea larvae. They'll collect the California bay leaf and leave it throughout their den, nibbling on the ends of them just to release the toxins, which sufficiently kill flea and flea larvae. So as cool as these homes are, all woodrat dens tend to have one very significant drawback, and that has to do with the type of material they use to make their homes, dry vegetation. And that drawback is that these homes are essentially kindling in a fire. If a fire were to break out in this area, this woodrat home and any other woodrat homes wouldn't stand a chance. They'd burn up just like that. And what's worse is that since fires also happen to burn all vegetation in the area, recovery for woodrats could take many years because there's nothing left for them to use to build their homes. So now that we know how sprawling these woodrat dens can be, it can be kind of hard to imagine that they'll actually last very long. After all, woodrats are solitary creatures, and on average, they only live to be about 3 years in the wild, which is not very long at all. And yet these woodrat dens, some have been found to have been in use for as long as 60 years. That's several generations of woodrats. But this is where we get an interesting glimpse into the lives of woodrats and the exceptions to their solitary lifestyle, which also happen to shed light on the differences between male and female woodrats. Females are the most sedentary of the two sexes, and what that means is that they tend to stay to the same area throughout their whole life. Male woodrats, on the other hand, are always on the move. And they're always on the move because they're always looking for an available female to mate with. So that first exception to their solitary lifestyle is during the mating season. At this time, the female woodrat may allow the male to share the home with her. However, after mating season ends, the male is given a boot, kicked out of the home, making him find an abandoned nest nearby or making him build his own home. The second exception is after the female gives birth to her young. When this happens, the mother will raise the baby woodrats on her own in her own home until they're ready to disperse. And this is where it gets really interesting, because when the woodrats do disperse from their mother, the daughters will actually prefer to stay near the mother, moving into an abandoned den nearby or making their own dens in the same general vicinity. What this can do is it can make essentially a woodrat neighborhood, a maternal woodrat neighborhood. So where you see one nest, look around you. You may see several nests all in the same area, meaning you're probably in a woodrat neighborhood like we are right now. So there's one thing we've yet to talk about with woodrats, and that has all to do with their pack rat tendencies. This behavior to collect seemingly useless items to bring them back to their den. And yes, woodrats, or appropriately nicknamed pack rats, love to collect random items, sometimes being attracted to shiny objects. They've been known to collect items ranging from jewelry, expensive or inexpensive, they don't discriminate, to CDs, to keys, to bullet casings, and unfortunately, even trash. They'll collect these items and bring them back to their den. What's even more interesting is that sometimes if a pack rat is bringing back an item to its den, it stumbles upon something even more attractive, they'll drop that first item in favor of the newly discovered item. And woodrats have even been known to use these collected items in the construction of their den. There's an article in the 1877 issue of the American Journal of Science that talks about a woodrat den built in an abandoned home. This den was found to have been constructed of several different items that were found in the abandoned home. The exterior of the den was almost entirely composed of nails pointed outward, effectively being a good deterrent against anything that would even want to try to break into that den, kind of like an iron fortress. Other items that were found to have been used in the construction include knives, forks, spoons, just about anything that you would find in an abandoned home. And that I find to be fascinating, because we humans like to think we're the first artistic architects. In fact, I would wager that perhaps woodrats are even the first architects this earth has ever known. So I hope now you have a greater appreciation for woodrats. Truly their lives are a lot more in depth than many of us would have even have thought initially. So the next time you're out on one of our trails and you see one of these woodrat homes, recognize that these aren't just big piles of sticks, twigs, and branches. It's actually a home to one of nature's greatest architects.